my name is Ksenia Zaytseva and I'm a data architect at the C3G in Montreal. And today I will talk about OMOP standard, and in the end of my presentation I will show you a small demo of our first prototype of OMOP based metadata service that we have developed for CanDIG. So let's start with the definition of OMOP. OMOP stands for Observational Medical Outcomes Partnership Common Data Model, and is developed within Odyssey network. OMOP is a data model for systematic analysis of disparate observational databases, and it supports both electronic healthcare records that are used in clinical practice or research and administrative claims. For example, it can support documentation for treatment costs or insurance reimbursement processes. The data transformed into OMOP common model by means of common predefined terminologies, vocabularies, or coding schemas. And the data model allows to store source data values from the original database. For this, it provides source value fields in each data table within the data model. This is a diagram of OMOP data model. It contains 6 blocks of different data tables. I would like to focus on clinical data tables and vocabulary tables because those two data types cover the most of the data use cases that we have. Clinical data tables contain information about person. Usually it will be 1 record per person. Each record will contain demographic information such as gender, date of birth, race, ethnicity, death date if the person is deceased. Observation table contains a clinical fact about person such as social, lifestyle facts, medical history or family history. This information usually will be obtained when a person comes to a medical facility, fills out a questionnaire, or when the person has a discussion with medical practitioner. Measurement table contains structured information, structured numerical and categorical values that are obtained by examination or testing of a person or a biosample. So laboratory test results, vital signs, findings from pathology reports, all will be recorded within measurement table. Condition occurrence is used for capturing the presence of disease or medical condition that can be stated as a diagnosis or sign or symptom in a person. It might be a little bit ambiguous to distinguish, not to distinguish, but to think that how would we put 2 data types such as disease and symptom in one data table. But OMOP introduces data type concept within each data table. So for example, if we have a disease that we record in condition data table, besides the name of the disease, we will have a condition type concept, and this concept will say that this condition is of type disease, or in case of symptom, it will say that this condition is of type symptom. And another important data table is a specimen that records information about biological sample that was taken from a person. Clinical data tables have other tables, but I won't talk about them today. This is the main core data tables that probably will cover most of our data needs. And another important part of OMOP data model is the usage of control vocabularies. In OMOP data model, each information unit is presented by a concept. And I have here a few examples how it looks like. The basic example is to record the condition, for example, a disease with the SNOMED concept and use the SNOMED concept ID. But besides of recording diseases or symptoms with concepts, OMOP also basically anything can be described with a concept ID. For example, specimens quantity is defined in quantity field, but the unit of the quantity defined in unit concept ID field. And unit concept ID will have a concept code, which stands for concept code milliliter, or and has a concept name milliliter. So this is just an example, but it can be any other unit, but all of them should be defined by the concept that comes from curated control vocabularies. Even absence of concept is also a concept. In OMOP, it's code 0 and the concept name no matching concept. So all vocabularies in OMOP, they are hierarchical structures, and they contain relationships to each other, and concepts on different levels of hierarchy can be related to each other. So I will continue a little bit more in detail about control vocabularies. Fortunately for us, all vocabularies are already curated and provided by ODC community. For this, they have a FINA server where they store vocabularies. User needs to be logged in order to select the vocabularies and download them for further usage. They provide, I think, 2 or 3 builds of vocabularies that follow the specific OMOP model. The latest OMOP model is 6. Yeah, it's OMOP version 6. Besides vocabularies, they also provide ETL scripts for vocabularies upload in database, and they support different database backends, among them Postgres, SQL Server, Impala, BigQuery, Oracle databases. And here I have to say that besides all of this work that already done by ODC community, the data mapping to vocabularies is still a responsibility of the data aggregator or data provider. So pros and cons of OMOP model based on my experience and my impression so far. I think it's a very clear relational data model. It's easy to understand and work with. It has extensive documentation, and they provide very valuable ETL scripts for creating database and loading vocabularies. Vocabularies are all already curated. They come in CSV files that follow the OMOP database structure, so it's very easy to import them with SQL statement, for example. There is also a community forum which seems very active, and some discussions initiated there regarding the mapping of genomics data, for example. So for the cons, I think like database management might be a little bit high maintenance, because since there are a lot of relationships between tables, when we upload the data, we should be aware of these relationships, and the data should be well formatted to be loaded easily. For example, the developers suggest to drop the constraints such as like foreign keys on a database every time we do a data upload, which I think is a little bit too much work every time to do that. And also database constraints, they provide us with a certain level of data validation when we load the data. So this won't be a solution, I think, but the solution can be done other ways when we build a service around the OMOP database. I'm sorry. And another, it's both pros and cons that the data model is heavily dependent on vocabularies. Well, it definitely will require more data annotation and curation, more time to assign the data with the proper vocabulary concept IDs, and each unit of data, not only the main data entities, but everything basically should have a concept ID. But at the same time, the higher quality of data annotation we have, the better data analysis we can perform on this data. So it's beneficial for these purposes too. And now I want to talk about the OMOP service, metadata service that Salomia and I were working, and we've developed the first prototype and successfully loaded the synthetic data. So OMOP service is an API service that works on top of the OMOP-based database. Technologies used Python, Django REST framework, and Postgres backend database. It also can work with SQLite database, but the vocabulary upload time is significantly longer than Postgres. So maybe it will fit for small vocabulary sizes. The database schema was created using OMOP SQL scripts that are provided by ODC community, and I've developed Django commands for automating the vocabularies upload to a database. This is how the current API looks like. We focused on main data types and exposed them by the API. There is API overview endpoint and endpoint for ingesting data. The data can be ingested in CSV and in JSON files for each data type. CSV simply follows OMOP field names for each data type. And for JSON, my colleague Salomia was working on creation of JSON schemas that we will also use for data validation in future. For the synthetic data set, we used simulated COVID-19 outbreak dataset for Massachusetts states. The dataset is a set of CSV files for each OMOP data type. And to test our JSON ingestion, Salomia converted main data types CSVs to JSON format following JSON schemas. So now I will just show you this service. I'm using Postman to show you a few examples. I've loaded more than 12,000 patients from the COVID-19 synthetic data sets. So this is how our endpoint looks like, how the response looks like. This is a single patient record here. And I've implemented few search options. For example, we can try female and to search for all female patients here. Then it follows the same OpenAPI standard for conditions, for measurements, observations, and the overview endpoint serves a summary about main data types, their count, and how many conditions, observations, measurements we have, and what data concepts are used to annotate the data and their count. So here we have a condition, and the condition type will be diagnosis. I mentioned this distinction before. Yeah, so that's it from me. And thank you. And if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Ksenia. We actually do have a couple questions for you in the chat. The first is from Mike. He asked, is there support for OBO or just Athena? Can it work with arbitrary ontologies?
Yes, so if some ontology is not a part of a current control vocabulary built for OMOP, then this ontology can be added to OMOP. It can go through the official ODC network, or like locally, we developers, we can try to convert the ontology to the OMOP format. And also, there is some tool for creating custom control vocabularies. For example, within a project, if we would have some custom control vocabulary, it also can be added to OMOP data model. They have some procedures how to do that.
Okay, great, thank you. And there is one more question from David. David, I don't know if you want to ask it so I correctly execute on your behalf, or so you correctly execute it.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Yeah, I was just asking because, like, when you're talking about the downsides of using OMOP, you were mentioning like one of the suggestions is to turn off foreign key checks and those things, and you were saying that this is like time consuming. Like, so I was wondering if there's anything else than just putting the switch off for the foreign key check that needs to be done in order to load data, because like this is like a parameter you can set on or off. And I agree with you in terms of like it sounds iffy because of like basically you stop validating your constraints, but
yeah.
But beyond that, like I was wondering if you could elaborate on this downside.
Yeah, I haven't tested with the command that you sent, but probably it can be set like that. My concern mainly that we can insert the data that won't match if we don't have the constraints on a database, if we switch the constraints.
It makes sense. Thank you.